Welcome, everyone, to the September edition of Drinks and Dress. My name is Leon Wiebers. I am the host of this webinar for the Costume Society of America. I am a professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University, and I also do research in Korean dress. I'm very excited about our program today, and today I would like to now invite our guest speaker and our guest curator, Lori Neuenfeld from Mississippi State University. Lori is an instructor and gallery director in the Department of Art and Historic Costume and Textiles of Mississippi State University in Starkville, Mississippi. Established in 1985, the collection houses over 1,200 garments and related articles that illustrate Mississippi and Southern dress and material culture of the 19th through the early 21st century. The collection is operated by the Fashion Design and Merchandising concentration in the MSU School of Human Sciences. Ms. Neuenfeld has taught art history at MSU since 2012, and she began working with the collection in 2014. Her background includes a BS in studio art and MA in art history from Florida State University. She was previously at the LSU Museum of Art in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the Kummer Museum of Art in Jacksonville, Florida. In the summer of 2009, she completed an internship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So please welcome Lori to our webinar. And our drink of the day is, of course, the Mississippi Mud. The recipe will be posted in the chat box for you. And again, a great shout out to Ann Wass for the alcohol-free version, the Mississippi Mud Puddle. And that will also be posted in the chat for those of you who wish to participate this afternoon. So Lori, come on in and join us. And I have poured my little Mississippi Mud cocktail and looking forward to your presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Leon, and thank you to all of the organizers. This has just been wonderful to get this invitation to be able to share information about our collection. And I just have really appreciated all of the work the CSA does. I'm a huge fan, so I'm so happy to be here. I put together a video that would be more of a highlights on our collection because so few people know about it. And I'm tried to choose pieces that would be sort of the lesser known or unexpected pieces that you may not, when we think of Mississippi and Southern dress, we do kind of have, an idea of what we think that might be. So I tried to choose objects that were really connected to the story of our local community. This is a collection of stories, a connection to history, whether home sewn, purchased at a local store down the street, or from across the oceans. The objects in the MSU Historic Costume and Textiles collection represent the lives of people. Relatable and real, the mission of the collection is to collect and preserve the objects entrusted to its care, provide opportunities for education, and to stimulate interest and further study in all aspects of costume history. Welcome to Mississippi State University's Historic Costume and Textiles collection. I'm happy to have you join me here in the collection storage space, and I'm going to give you an overview of the collection, which includes some of the highlights and unique pieces that connect to the stories in our own local community. I'm also going to introduce you to some of the ways that we work with students on research projects, including the proper handling and storage of historic garments, and even ways they use the garments for design inspiration and product development. Thank you for joining me again, and welcome to the collection. Approximately 1,200 objects relating to the material culture of dress are housed in a storage space in Moore Hall on MSU's campus just down the road from Starkville, Mississippi. Originally used as a dormitory, Moore Hall has classrooms and labs for students pursuing degrees in the School of Human Sciences. Far from the runway and focused on the everyday, objects are examples of fashions ranging from the mid-1800s to 2000. Many of the items are worn and faded, but anyone who visits the collection can find a connection to the past. Primarily a resource for students at MSU, the Historic Costume and Textiles collection is used for research, class projects, and design inspiration. The collection provides hands-on learning and a memorable experience for students. Every undergraduate fashion design and merchandising major at MSU spends a semester collaborating with the collection as an important component of the Survey of Historic Costume lecture and lab. Non-student visitors and tour groups are given access by appointment and may schedule a time to visit the collection. Established in the 1980s by MSU faculty member Dr. Catherine Boyd, the collection originally served to support the Department of Home Economics. In 1996, the Department of Home Economics became the School of Human Sciences, and around 2013, focus of the degree shifted to address the needs and goals of the contemporary student, and the degree program in apparel, textiles, and merchandising was renamed Fashion Design and Merchandising. A collection that connects to people in Mississippi communities all started because of the connections with Mississippi communities. A quote from Dr. Boyd from a 2005 Starkville Daily News article recalls the start of the collection. According to Dr. Boyd, the mother of a student rescued 4 or 5 outfits from a church collection box and thought the home economics students would enjoy seeing the costumes, which dated to the 1930s. More items were added. A large portion of historic garments from the Grenada Historical Society in Grenada, Mississippi found a new home at MSU when the items could not be cared for any longer. Additional donations from MSU faculty and staff, the local community, and donors with family ties to Mississippi now make up the majority of items, with a small portion being transfers from other university collections. There are other institutions in the state of Mississippi that collect historic garments and pieces of clothing. However, the scope of their collection might focus more on movie costumes or theater costumes, or a general overview of the state of Mississippi and the history of Mississippi. Mississippi State University's Historic Costume and Textiles Collection is the only collection in the state of Mississippi that focuses primarily on the history of dress and material culture of fashion. We have examples of women's wear, men's wear, children's wear, and everything from the accessories you would wear with those, so including undergarments, shoes, hats, gloves, and jewelry. Now that you know an overview of the collection, let's look at some of the highlights. The bulk of our collection is women's wear. Most garments date between the 1960s and 1970s, which means they're bright and bold or minimalist and subtle, but these pieces range from the homemade constructed items to off-the-rack looks. Visitors to the collection typically ask, what's the oldest piece in the collection? Well, the oldest piece that we have in the storage area are actually fragments of early Christian Coptic textiles that date to the 7th through the 9th centuries. Since the Historic Costume and Textiles Collection enjoys a special partnership with the Lois Dowdle Cobb Museum of Archaeology, located here at Mississippi State University, we are able to arrange a permanent loan of the fragments that could be used for teaching purposes to introduce our students taking historic costume, some of the earlier pieces that we have access to. Now, the earliest piece owned by the collection is an 1830s or 1840s silk bonnet that was donated a couple of years ago. Many of our items, though, unfortunately, we don't have secure dating for. Many items that don't have records, we have to just make an approximation on the dates. So along with our oldest piece, I guess you could say we have our youngest piece, and that is a 2000 Vera Wang wedding dress that was donated by a former student who was interning at Vera Wang. One of the most unique and fascinating items in our collection is a coat that dates to about the late 19th, early 20th century. When I first started working in the collection, I came across a box of items that did not have any information with them, and many of them were balled up or folded up. They were in pretty poor condition with insect damage and water damage. And I approached Dr. Wanda Cheek, who is the amazing professor who oversaw the collection before I took over. And she had said that many of the items came from Meadow Woods. And Meadow Woods is a home, the former home of the Rice family. It's a plantation home out in Oktok, which is just outside of the city, just down the road from Mississippi State University.
The home was built in 1839 and is the second oldest home that still stands in Oktibbeha County. So a secured transfer of the items that were a variety of the damaged items were arranged to come to Mississippi State University's collection. And the clothing examples are not what people typically expect when they hear Southern plantation home. This particular coat stood out because the colors were still very vivid. We have a red collar and red cuffs and a nice deep blue jacket. It didn't look like anything that I was familiar with at the time, but I put my art historian hat on and did a visual analysis. And as mentioned, it is a wool coat, but it has this beautiful embroidery on the collar and the cuffs, on the shoulders, down the front, and along the bottom. And it's a beautiful floral motif. Another closer look allowed me to see that the buttons, the ones that were still attached, and also I had some that were detached, each of them were different, and they featured a variety of different animals, and that included dogs and hunting hounds, a fox, a deer, and a rabbit. So this led me down my own rabbit hole, searching for coats that were similar but could have had a relationship to hunting themes. I was looking at the buttons and was trying so hard to draw a relationship to this as perhaps a uniform that could have been used in hunting. I had a few colleagues look at the coats, and they also made some suggestions that perhaps it could have been used as a uniform or livery, or maybe even just a costume for theater at the time period. It's such an attractive piece, and anyone who comes in the collection who sees it immediately has lots of questions, so I hated not having answers. So I started researching and looking at comparable items on the internet, specifically focused on the embroidery. And when I look at the embroidery and touch it, it has a harder feel to it. So this is not wool or silk or cotton. And I thought perhaps it was grass. So I started looking at grass embroidered objects. And this led me to some items in the Cooper Hewitt Museum with their online database. One particular item was very similar in the motif with the floral elements, and it was a wallet. And actually, instead of grass, the catalog information mentioned it was made of moose hair. And I'm thinking, moose? We don't have a moose or any multiple moose in Mississippi. So what is this coat doing here? How did it get here? So the style and the motifs for color were similar to that item from the Cooper Hewitt Museum. And I started looking at other moose-haired embroidered items, and they were all beautiful, but had a very similar origin to the Huron-Wendat First Nation peoples in Canada, which now they're located just outside of Quebec. And the items that I was seeing online were items that were identified as being made for a European audience. So there was a tradition of moose hair embroidered objects being produced by the Wendat First Nations specifically for Americans and Europeans who were traveling to Canada as part of the late 19th, early 20th century rite of passage or status symbol, and collecting objects from the people of those different countries. So looking more at those items with moose hair embroidery, it was really helpful to see that this particular object has a relationship to those objects made for the tourist industry. And feeling much more confident in securing and identifying this object, I contacted an art historian, Annette De Stecker at University of Colorado Boulder, who is an expert in researching the art of the embroidery of the Wendat First Nations people. And we arranged a Zoom call, and she was able to do a visual analysis of the coat and also confirm that this was made in the art of that tradition. And of course, this actually makes sense when I go back to the items in the box that were stored with it And they were a little bit easier to identify. There are pieces from a traditional Eastern European folk costume, but also the finger-woven sash or belt, which was comparable to many finger-woven sashes that were produced by Native American tribes in America. And when I started researching the moose hair embroidery and the style of the coat and the sash, I was able to come across some images online that depicted Wendat peoples wearing this style of coat with the sash. So these two items actually, we might suggest, go together. We don't see any wear across the waist that actually show that this particular belt was worn. They may have just been collected and ending up in the Meadow Woods home. We might suggest that perhaps the Rice family was traveling during certain time periods and collecting objects. And we do actually have a variety of different journals from the Rice family through many different generations. And they're located here at Mississippi State University in our special collections at the Mitchell Memorial Library on campus. And I took some time to go through those journals to see if there was any details about travels to Canada and doing any shopping and souvenir collecting. And while I haven't found anything specific saying that this was purchased by anyone in the family, I was able to confirm that they did travel to Canada. They did travel to Europe. It was during certain times of the year that they wanted to get away from the heat in Mississippi, and they would spend it up north. So we do know that the family was in Canada during certain times of the year, and they traveled there regularly. So this is an example of a variety of different themes, and I think it's exciting to talk to our audience about what it stands for, certainly representing traditional arts that are coming from the First Nations people of Canada. It's an example of the tourist industry and the souvenir items, but also how these items act as status symbols during that late 19th, early 20th century for families who were traveling abroad and showing their status through the collection of objects of peoples that they would come in contact with. Right now, I'm working on accessioning and storing a recent donation that came into the collection in 2021. The items help illustrate the story of the Stark family, one of the early families in Starkville that can trace their family roots in Mississippi back generations. In 2020, items were purchased from the estate sale of Betsy Stark and later donated to the collection. The items date to the early 20th century and most likely belong to Betsy Stark's mother, Annie Reynolds Stark. This suit dates to around the 1910s and contains a clue as to where established families in Northeast Mississippi, families like the Starks, would go to purchase clothing items that were not made in the home. The tag on the inside of the jacket says, M. Kaplan Ladies Tailor, Savannah, Georgia. This could suggest that Savannah, Georgia was close enough for shopping or ordering source goods from businesses there. A second piece from the Stark family estate is an example that our students really enjoy. It's a lovely golden 1920s evening dress with a small asymmetrical train and silk flowers. It's more typical that we see in this time period that the dress does not have a label, but the construction details indicate it was made with skill. Another interesting family donation came from the Oakley family. This is a great donation with strong ties to our community and university. It was a very large donation of many items, and the family is well known in this area. The father was a fifth-generation farmer, and he was a dairy farmer in Oktok. His three daughters that donated the items attended public high school in Starkville, and they went to Mississippi State University and stayed local after graduating with teaching in the public schools and also teaching here at Mississippi State University. The Oakley donation consists of baby, juniors, and women's clothing, and many of the items are home sewn by their mother, Mary Cowsert Oakley. And we can see different stages of life and fashions from the same family, which makes this donation very unique. We have baby clothes, high school formal dresses, and even wedding wear worn by the same persons. And the family were incredible. They documented these items very well, and they made notations of when items were worn, when they were made, and where they were worn, and it's been so helpful. They even provided photos. So, for example, we have this beautiful 1962 turquoise homecoming dress that was meant for the Starkville High School homecoming program, and was actually worn by one of the daughters, Florence, for the homecoming court. It's beautiful strapless outfit that is very distinct with the huge skirt. And this was made by her mother, Mary Cowsert Oakley. Another early 1960s dress was also made for Starkville High School homecoming. And this one is yellow now, but according to the donors, they mentioned that this was originally green, so something about the fabric changed over time. We also have examples of gowns that were worn by the daughters when they were at Mississippi State University. We have a 1967 dress that was made for the Zeta Tau Alpha pledge night for Mary Sue. And what's really fun is Mary Cowsert Oakley, the mother, saved many of the patterns from the items that she made for her daughters. So we have some home sewn fashions with the patterns, such as this 1970s vest, skirt, and shirt made from a McCall's pattern. That was made for Mary's daughter, Frances. Items that have a strong connection to history in our area or a recognizable label brand are the most interesting for students to research. They might feel a connection to an item if it's from a city they've been to or a familiar designer. While unfortunately they are not all in the best condition, we still house objects in poor condition for the value they have in their associations to the region or as teachable objects for design or materials. One example is a bustle-era dress that was given by a donor who collected it from the Temple Heights Manor in Columbus, Mississippi. The house originally belonged to a plantation owner who built it so his family could be closer to the city. And eventually he sold it to two other families, and by the 1860s it belonged to the Kennebrews. And as you can see in the image, this particular ensemble, the gown, is not in the best state. It being silk, it just did not survive the conditions of being stored in the home for so many years. But we do keep it as an example of a garment that connects to the history of our area and for showing the type of construction that was used in creation of bustle-era gowns. All right, now that we've looked at some of the highlights from our collection, or what you might call the good, it's time to look at the odd and unusual. I have here this lovely pair of 1950s baby slippers that are actually items that the students think are very creepy, or they might say are not as visually appealing to them because they're made out of real rabbit fur, and they have these beady red eyes that the students always say are very frightening to them, as I mentioned, using the word creepy. But yeah, they're lovely and sweet baby slippers from the 1950s, but they always seem to get a reaction out of students. We do have items that might seem unusual at first, including this collar. Among many of the neckwear items we have for men's wear, this is a unique detachable collar. It's a deep red or maroon velvet with silver embroidered leaves and vegetation. When I found this in the collection, it was tempting to put it aside because it's, again, not in the best condition, and it was very unusual because it doesn't seem like one of those distinct fashion items from the decades that we're familiar with. My curiosity got the better of me when I saw that there was a label on the reverse. The label said it was sold by the Henderson Ames Company, Military and Society Goods in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Using this information, I researched on the internet and found a catalog for the company from about 1900. Inside was a picture illustration of this style of collar, and it included a description for the purpose of the collar. It was sold as a collar, style number 34, embroidered silver trimmed collar lined with serge and interlined, floral spray hand-embroidered silver bullion and surrounded by silver spangles. It is meant for an independent Order of Oddfellows Lodge officer's regalia costume. According to the Oddfellows website, the Independent Order of Oddfellows command is to visit the sick, relieve the distressed, bury the dead, and educate the orphan. I'm still not 100% sure how this collar got in our collection, but the city of Starkville does have an Oddfellows cemetery, and early use of it dates back to the 19th century, and it's been identified as one of the oldest African American cemeteries in Mississippi. So this item, though very unusual and might seem unattractive at first to audiences, is actually an object that we can use to approach difficult discussions about the early history of Mississippi and initiate those conversations that connect to our local history. Working with students and providing opportunities for education is key to our mission. We do that through one-on-one collaboration with students. I work with students, training them in methods for proper handling, documentation, and storage practices for historic items. While we do not have graduates entering historic or museum fields, it's important that they have an appreciation and awareness for the areas. Faculty, craft lessons, and projects that engage students. My dual role here at Mississippi State University involves teaching and directing the art galleries. And with that, I oversee coordinating programming and exhibitions. So whenever I get a chance, I include students in exhibition planning. For the fashion design and merchandising students, this is a fun way to get them interested in historic costume research and also get them experience in visual design and the communication of dress that they might use in professional fields that they enter into. Some of the major past exhibitions that I've organized with students include Fashion A to Z, selections from the MSU Historic Costume and Textiles Collection, and Silk Unraveled, a revealing look at the history and use of silk textiles. Students were involved in planning these exhibitions by being assigned specific objects to research, thinking about their display, helping with installation, and then including the language that is used on the label information. They were also involved with branding and marketing the show, so everything from designing the show logos to the posters and doing the kind of marketing and media relations. Every spring around March, the Historic Costume and Textiles Collection organizes a small display for the Ragtime Festival, which is held here at Mississippi State University. Display themes have a general focus on ragtime music, but also into the jazz era, which is around the year 1918 through the 1920s. Past titles and themes include Fashion Blooms in the 1920s, which focused on floral elements on 1920s fashions. Also, fashions from the year jazz was born, so clothing that was around the 1918 time period. Great Gatsby, What's Underneath? And this was a student-led project to show the types of undergarments that would be worn underneath 1920s styles. And a 1920s wedding party. My favorite display was actually recreated looks from the sheet music covers that are housed in the collection that's located at the Mitchell Memorial Library. The Templeton Collection focuses on the business of music and is a collection of a lot of different objects. But the sheet music has beautiful artwork and illustrations that depict the fashions of the time period. And we interpreted and styled looks that drew a connection to these. Currently, I'm working with a student volunteer on an exhibition for the Gumtree Museum of Art in Tupelo. They contacted me and requested an exhibition that demonstrated looks from each of the decades of the 20th century, so the 1900s. At Mississippi State University, it's important that students learn how historic items can provide a source of inspiration for designs and products. The responsible way to go about sourcing elements is important to learn, and you do this by learning more about the history, the cultural meaning, and the provenance of an item. In the spring 2021 semester, the main Historic Costume Lab project introduced students to nonprofit retail and its role supporting historic collections and cultural institutions. So serving as the client, the Mississippi State University Historic Costume and Textiles Collection became that source of inspiration for products and merchandise created by students who identified themselves as young entrepreneurs and acted as vendors, and that included taking on roles designing, prototyping, and retailing products, all for a real pop-up shop that was scheduled for the end of the semester. And a lot of it was talking about the role of the nonprofit retail store, or you might call it the gift shop, that role helping the mission of a historic collection or museum that can educate visitors and also help draw attention to the collection. So the project actually complements and builds upon MSU classes in product development, retail, and merchandising by providing students a real-world experience to apply their knowledge. Every student that was in the Historic Costume Lab was completely funded by a Robert Heron Foundation grant. They each got $500 and used those funds to purchase supplies, packaging, or fixtures. The final shop opened in May at the Msu Idea Shop, which is located in downtown on Main Street in Starkville, and we had a variety of products. Many of them were handmade. Some of the most popular products that sold include a tote bag and a scarf featuring hand-drawn illustrations of garments from the collection. There was also a student who was interested in using 3D printing technology, and she was inspired by an 1890s silk gown that had detailed motifs with feathers and flowers. And she created a 3D printed earring and necklace set inspired by these motifs. And I even am wearing my 3D printed feather necklace and flower earrings today to show that they are beautiful as accent accessories, even for the young professional like myself. Also, other products that are unique was a hand-beaded bag that a student made, and it was inspired by one of the plastic mod era handbags that we might all be familiar with. Other items include a paper doll that was created and hand illustrated by a student, but it featured MSU's mascot Bully the Bulldog wearing a variety of vintage MSU gear from the 1960s and the 1970s. And our most popular item is the custom cowbell. And many people who had commented online, so people not affiliated with Mississippi State University, were curious to know why a cowbell. But it's actually one of our traditions. It's one of our symbols here at Mississippi State University. It traces back to early football game, an early football competition that involved a cow walking onto the field. So we embrace that. It is tradition here at Mississippi State University that you get a cowbell and you can ring it at sporting events, but your cowbell must be a gift, that first one you get. So we were thinking about our clients being from Starkville and being Mississippi State University fans, but also the time of year was around graduation when we were having this shop. So we thought what a great opportunity to provide a custom cowbell for any fashion design merchandising major who is graduating. People could go in and find a cowbell and give it as a gift. So each cowbell had a photo transferred image depicting a garment from the collection, and details were hand painted for the finishing touches. So one of a kind item produced by our students inspired by the Historic Costume and Textiles collection. Thank you for spending some time with me learning a little bit more about the MSU Historic Costume and Textiles collection. I hope you enjoyed your time learning about the highlights and some of the interesting stories that we have to tell.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions. That was fantastic. It was really great to see the breadth of your collection and the unusual things of it. First of all, I love the bunny slippers. I'm super in love with the bunny slippers, evil eyes and all. Like those are great. I want a pair.
I know. Like I said, I kept using the word lovely, and it was like, but students, they're just, it must be the red eyes, or they just
It's
have
the
the
red
pointy nose. So something doesn't translate to them.
yeah, the reality of the bunny versus the makeup of the bunny now,
Yes,
because
maybe,
bunnies do have red
maybe.
eyes.
I think we do.
And I love the cowbell. That's hilarious. Those are like, what a really fun way of of taking the collection and using it in different ways to inspire your students in merchandising and product development and whatnot. So, yeah, how many cowbells do you have left?
Oh my goodness. So we actually had to order more. So I do have a larger supply because we had sold out of our original run. But yeah, they're all handmade using because we'd take photographs and then print them on like the powdered inkjet printer and then photo transfer them and then hand paint in detail. So it was a good. I had a student, obviously a student who worked with me, but then a student later on volunteered to make some more. So we're ready for more orders.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. Okay, so wow, where to begin? So first of all, I want to say thank you so much. This was really thorough and encompassing of the really interesting breadth of your collection. And I love the objects that you chose to share with us. Especially, I love the home sewn ones. That whole collection that you talk about. From the family that gave it, where they documented them along the way. So document your clothes, people, because
Oh,
in 100 years, nobody thinks the Target shirt you're wearing is worth anything, but it really kind of is.
and that's what I love the stories. So anytime we start considering something from a donor, I'm always like, you have to write down as much as you can about this item, give me a photo. And so the family, the Oakley family, I didn't even have to ask, it's like they just knew. So they came in and they had everything with these large paper tags with who made it, where it was worn, and when it was worn, and then all of the photos to accompany it. So because telling the story of the item, it, like I said, is really important to us to be able to, because we don't have a lot of physical items that might remain from clothing that we wear, especially handmade. Those stories are so important. Yeah.
I would love to see. I don't know if this has been done, but I would love to see. I'm sure it's been done somewhere, but I would love to see an exhibition of homemade clothes. Like of homemade clothes across the way. An area of research that I'm working on right now that's just beginning for me um, involves some dresses in my home state of South Dakota and some garments there. And discovering that some of these people made their own clothes for these very formal events is just astonishing and super fun. And you get to look inside of them and you're like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And seeing still like the pounce wheel tracings and stuff like that is it's part of the dress detective world. And
Exactly, because some of these are constructed in a way where you're like, I don't know if I would have done it that way. So they do have these unique stories, that are sort of, yeah, between the scenes, even. And it's fun to show students that as well, because when we study historic costume, we're looking at textbook images or large, beautiful, and a lot of the pieces that we have, I have to sort of say, like, this is kind of the in between. If we think of like the trickle down, or the understanding, like, this is in fashion. We know that this might not be studied as a style for this decade, but this was worn during this decade because it was home sewn, and maybe it wasn't in fashion until years later now in Mississippi. And we think about where. So I always think about that, where in Mississippi can you go to buy things, especially during certain times. Even today we don't have a mall, and malls are already outdated. We never got one of those here in Starkville. So where were people going? And a home sewing was an absolute, that's an option for them.
yes, absolutely. And especially in the mid 20th century until later, like it was ubiquitous. Like
Mm.
everybody really knew how to sew. And so well, mostly women. Maybe a few men, but knew how to sew and made these things for themselves or for their families or in other different ways. And so I love that story. I love and the high level of skill that so many home sewers have in order to make those things is just really fascinating, and I think is really is overshadowed often by the couturier or the larger exhibits around the country. So I love that you highlighted that in this video because it's wonderful, and that you even have the patterns that she made it from. Like that's a research paper waiting to happen right there to like.
I couldn't believe they came in with patterns. I was just, I mean, I love, obviously I work in collection management. I'm a hoarder at the core, but it was impressive to see because, I mean, we do occasionally we'll get, someone who has saved a lot of patterns and they want to donate just patterns, but I don't very often get someone who has the pattern and the actual garment. Yeah.
Right, right. Actually, there's a colleague in CSA, Gail Streggy, who has a collection at I'm forgetting where she's at, Ohio State University. And she has a pattern collection that relates directly to some of the work of Bonnie Cashin. And so she is working with those connections between the pattern and the garments as well. But that you have this home sewing machine, this home pattern. Okay, so with the last minutes left, I mean, we could talk forever, and cheers. Thank you very much. I've been sipping on
Yay.
my Mississippi Mud while we were there. So let's open the floor up to questions. And I seriously want a pair of those bunny slippers. Um,
You
okay,
should need
so
grown-up size. Yes.
I know exactly. Okay, here are some of the things. Some people are commenting on the bunny slippers, but they would be super cute on bunny feet. Um, one viewer is like, I love the idea of the multiple layers of engagement for your students. The research, the display, the making of things for the shop, it's so great. Um, Another viewer mentioned that they love the sleuthing that you did on the embroidered coat, and we'd love to talk about how you engage students in that research. Actually, I have a question about how do you. I love that you really talked about your art historical background, your art historian background, influencing the work that you're doing now, and how those things overlap and interface. So I appreciate that. And are you finding that? Um, so how did you actually come to dress out of art history?
So, yeah, so I'm studying art history at Florida State University. I was able to work with some Coptic textile fragments as part of a course. It was called East of Byzantium. So we were looking at the cultures at the same time period as Byzantine, and um, there was just something about studying the textiles and at the same time understanding this part of like the visual culture of that time period. And I was already familiar in looking at mosaics, and it was just like the subject matter and the motifs and sometimes even like the qualities of like the thicker woven textiles, they look very similar to mosaics in the way that they're kind of we think chunky looking but also like very refined and sophisticated. So that got me curious, and I ended up taking an additional course in costume history while I was in grad school, as sort of just an add-on, sort of like a sidecar to what I was already doing,
Exactly.
and just loved it, and it just started seeing more and more of a relationship between the how our identities and identities of figures, even in works of art, are absolutely connected to the clothing that they're wearing. I mean, what we wear today is, I mean, but in works of art, this is all about who holds the status, who holds the power, what
Yes.
rank and group affiliation, all we know. And I will have to say I was kind of encouraged. I have a wonderful partner in life, who he actually teaches fashion design merchandising classes here at Mississippi State University. And so we oftentimes have conversations. Our home life is it's glasses of wine shared where we have these. We go to museums, we go places, and so it was just this relationship that we have was also the relationship of art and fashion. So that when the opportunity came for us here at Mississippi State University and with the historic costume collection, I love working in collection management. But yes, to be completely honest, I do not know how to sew. When it comes to the construction or identifying of certain types of fibers, I do have to rely on my students and other faculty, but I am drawn to that visual analysis, and I love doing a good research. Oh man, yeah, researching that's why I love even the ones that they might be in poor condition, but I'm like, I got to research it. I got to go down there.
Awesome, excellent. Okay, so we have a question. So where did they acquire the fabrics? Through like a traveling salesman? I think we're referring to the home sewers, the Oakley family. So do you have a sense of where they got the fabrics? Was there a big fabric store
Oh, I
in town?
don't. Yeah, I don't know, but that is a good question. Because yeah, it's like okay, with the patterns, they're like a McCall pattern, like well, that's fairly well known. Yeah, so it's like yeah, if they were ordering, I will ask them. I love the family. I communicate with them at least once a year, because they are active in multiple different organizations. So that's going to be my next question. Thank you for giving me something to research.
Yay, dress and drinks.
Yay!
Um,
Yeah.
and yes, Heidi Cochran. So you're saying that it's okay that I kept the patterns and swatches for the dresses I made for my sisters when I was in high school? Yes, please, please do, and share them. And if your sisters still have those dresses, I think maybe there's a collection here who might want them.
That's
Um,
right.
Um, home sewing was not cool in the late 70s where I grew up. I know it
Oh,
shifts and changes. Sorry. I remember learning how to sew for my grandmother on her treadle machine, in the years. Um,
that's, I was gonna say, I think my mom was still home sewing. I'm one of three girls and which four children. So my mom just took, she had one pattern and she just made multiples using, it's like, we were always wearing the same style. She even made swimsuits for us. So I grew up with home sewn.
Totally. There is a family photo. There is a family photo of the Weber's family, all in like matching or coordinating outfits of suits, dresses. I'm sure it was double knit polyester of, really interesting colors and patterns. And there's a family photo somewhere. I'm sure my little sister has it. So now I love you since you're in your vault or your storeroom, like it looks really beautiful and organized. You were saying you were sort of being like, well, our collection, blah blah blah, when we met privately, but you have a really phenomenal vault there. So talk about your storage facility.
So, yes, it is very humble. It is just one room. We don't have a display gallery or display cases. We just have one room, and it is located in a classroom building. Which, the plus side of that is I can access these in the classroom where we do our lab space. So I don't have to like get some sort of special arrangements or we have to arrange travel or anything. But it is an old building that was built in the 1940s, and so we just kind of had to do an assessment of it. It's kind of progressed over time, where like there was some old carpeting removed. At one point, it was an office building, and we had to put blackout treatments on the windows. So yes, structurally, I don't know if you heard the creaking during the video, but it's just like it sounds almost like rain outside, but it's the actual building just like creak, 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 creak. But yeah, we transitioned when I came into the space. I got such great support from the director for the School of Human Sciences, Dr. Newman, and I just explained like, oh well, we could use some of the funds to get some metal shelving and some more archival boxes. So we made an investment in that. Ideally, I would love to have some sort of flat file system to be able to lay out some of my delicate garments. So, truth be told, the boxes you see behind me, we have had to, they're shared spaces. Some of the garments are rolled up, and we're trying to make good use of what we have. And a lot of that is just what everyone does who oversees collections. You're just assessing the needs of the garment and then just it's like doing what we can. What was it, the comparison I did give you? It was sort of like we're in the trenches and I'm a surgeon in the Civil War and I'm just like grabbing grabbing tools that I can and like you're gonna live, you're gonna survive, and I'm gonna make sure you get out of this. so
There,
but yeah, it's we have most of our garments that are on the racks, our Z racks. They are uncovered, but we luckily have timed lighting in here, so it's motion censored. I kept thinking at some point it was going to go off during that's why I keep moving my hands around because keep moving. It will go dark in here. And we can maintain the temperature in here. I've worked with
oh, that's
the
great.
MSU facilities folks, and they're on board with me keeping it at 67 degrees in Mississippi during the heat of the summer. Which anywhere else on campus, they get a little pushback on that. But yeah, we do. We're making do with what we have, and
That's great. You're
you
not
know,
the only MASH unit of clothing in the
yeah.
world, even in your state, probably. So
No, no. I look at it as like as long as there's things to improve on, I still have a job. So
there is that. There is that. So let me ask you a couple of other questions. So, you mentioned in the video that you are open to scholars coming in and looking at the collection. How does
Mhm.
one do that? Do they just call you or email you? And
Email, yeah, and usually email just because then I get a better sense of what it is that you need to do as a scholar or a student. So with students, occasionally you get the random email of like, I need to make an appointment, and there's no signature. You're like, who is
Right.
this? So it's just like, okay, I can fire back with, all right, what are you looking for? What's the purpose of your visit? Are there specific items or periods or materials or fibers you want to look at? Because so many things are in boxes, we just need to be prepared. I want to have all of that out and ready so we're not moving. One thing you always learn with art handling, right? It's most susceptible to damage when it's in transit. So let me
Correct.
get it out and get it stabilized, so that if you need to do some research to see the physical object, we can. So
Yeah.
yeah. So yes, emails. We do have an online database that's through the Mitchell Memorial Library. And
Oh,
it's not
fantastic.
nearly it's not nearly all of the pieces we have, and a lot of the photos they're by students. So but we do have a digital footprint, an online footprint, so that if somebody had further questions about something they saw, in fact, I have been even contacted before by people to say, this is an incorrect data, you need to change your data. Great, fine. That's just what I need. I need someone who can help me get better.
Well, and that's part of what CSA is. And so, and love that you have a beginning of a digital footprint, as you mentioned, because that is one of the efforts that myself and Dr. Monica Sklar and Arden Kirkland through CSA and other great members of this organization are attempting to do, is actually build a portal where some of these collections can actually be researched throughout together. So we're continuing to work on that, and we will be talking with you, I'm sure, now that I know
Yeah.
this,
Well,
about your digital
it's so
footprint. And
important. I mean, I point to the research that I just shared today, which could not have been done without online databases. And those are the stories that would need to be told, like the unknown stories. For many of the peoples that are different parts of the world. That's like we just need to know more about those. So I'm
yeah,
excited. Let's do it, Leon.
okay, great, awesome. I will be calling you for a letter so I can attach it to a grant very soon.
You got it. I love a good grant.
But no, you're absolutely correct. So many of the stories that are out there in our country and in the world are untold and are hidden away, or are unknown or unshared. And that's exactly what this effort is about not only this webinar, but also the work that Dr. Sklar and I are doing, and the work that all of our members in CSA doing, is sort of revealing these stories, and sharing them in different ways. And so, this way you can, like, point to other people and be like, see, these are still important. And the things that are lost the most are those of daily people, just everyday people. The things that are kept mostly are those of the rich and famous, and or couture, and so those are the stories that need to be shared more and more. I love that coat, by the way. That is so stunning. And who knew? I had no idea that moose hair was turned into embroidery. Like,
No.
that rocks off. I was like, moose hair? Okay, great. Like,
No, I would have never even thought. Yeah, so it's moose hair, and I guess they were doing it with porcupine quill, to actually do the embroidery. And yeah, and it was through the insistence of, students would see this coat, and it is just the embroidery is so striking on that, especially the red collar and the cuffs. And so they always want to. That was actually, it came up during this past spring semester. It was like the second time a student was like, I'm going to use this for my research. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know anything about that. That's not really, if it's, we want to make sure you use it appropriately. If you're going to make a product, that's really risky if we don't know anything about this. This could have
right.
like so it pushed me to say like, okay, you know what? I'm going to really, really focus more. So looking at the embroidery, like I said, I had it in my mind, it was going to be something related to hunting because of those buttons.
I know those buttons are really interesting, and I love that they're all different. I'm really curious. I'm wondering how they, like. Well, okay, there are many options of the way that the moose hair could have been dyed, but that the moose hair has all those beautiful colors in it as well. It's like, how, like, I want to know more about that now.
Yeah.
Are you soaking it in, crushed raspberries in order to get this color, or what's going on there?
Well,
So,
and luckily talking to the art historian at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and Annette DeStecker, she has said, she's like, okay, let me zoom in on that. She's like, aha, I see Movine. This is how we can tell they're using synthetic dyes, right? So,
Oh,
so yeah, so I mean, they were incorporating, obviously, whatever the materials of the culture are for the day, whether in they're synthetic, so modernized. And again, it was just so it's fascinating when you look at the items. I think the V&A Museum has a pair of red high heel women's heels that have the same embroidery, like it's the exact same motif, and they're really fun to look at. And yet, again, it's like this is a very European audience. So these types of items were collected by people or even given as gifts, for people if they're important people traveling to Canada. So yeah, no, I had the same. I was writing the same story in my mind, Leon, about those colors. I was like, now how did they get these colors? And then yeah, I was like, oh, of
oh,
course, yes,
of course. Lori, thank you so much for this. This has been
yeah,
just delightful. It's been lovely seeing your collection,
thank
and
you.
seeing the objects in it. It's really interesting, unique, interesting, cool things that are always hidden away. And like I said, those bunny slippers. Like I think
I
you need to
know.
like make those bigger, and those are a marketing thing waiting to happen right there.
I think so. I know. There's got to be
I might, even though I'm not much of a sports fan.
a
I mean,
everyone
tennis.
needs a cowbell with a dress, on it, or a 1970s jumpsuit, whatever you're passionate about,
Yes.
whatever period. We tried to do like we have one from the 1930s styles, 1940s. So we try to get every decade covered, but it can
Okay.
be useful if you're a teacher, you just gotta just bring the
Yes.
cowbell in
Yes,
class.
indeed. I have so many uses for that right now. So we will be in contact about a cowbell because there is,
Okay. All right.
and I'm intrigued by the 70s jumpsuit. I am a fan of the 70s. So in any case, thank you very much for your time today,
Yeah.
Lori, and
Well,
thank
thank
you for
you.
sharing your beautiful collection with us.
Well, thank
Uh,
you, Leon, and thank you to all of CSA for allowing me to share the stories. So I hope if anyone has any questions or interests, certainly put them in touch with me.
Absolutely, we will. And so, with that, I want to say thank you to Lori and Mississippi State for sharing this phenomenal collection. For those of you who, as we wrap up today, thank you very much for coming to today's webinar, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great evening, and thank you so much.